Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to AJ 112 Introduction to Criminology. My name is Tony Farrar, and of course, I am your instructor for this semester. Tonight's lecture is going to be on Chapter 9, where we're going to look at a series of developmental theories. That'll include things like life course theory, propensity theory, trajectory theory, and then a couple of other sub-theories that we'll look at as well. So what do we hope to get out of this evening? We're going to jump right into our lecture. We're going to take a look at the history and influences on developmental theory. We're going to not just list, but really identify the principles of life course theory and developmental theories. We're going to look at the term behavior syndrome and see how that is applicable to our lecture this evening. We're going to look at some research, specifically Sampson and Laub's age-graded life course theory. We will explain some of the principles of latent trait. And latent means what? It means invisible. So maybe you could kind of think about that as we're going through. And then, or hidden, sorry. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with looking at some of the principles of trajectory theory. So life course theory, propensity theory, trajectory theories, and a couple of different sub-theories that go along with those as well. So here we go. So fact or fiction, we do this every chapter lecture just to kind of get your brain moving, stimulate some thought, and remember we're talking about developmental theories. So that might be something on the level of, let's say, a career criminal. And what makes that person a career criminal? When did it start? How does it keep going? And does it ever end? So with that being said, let's do the fact or fiction. Number one, getting married helps people stay out of trouble. Kind of an interesting thing. What if you were a career criminal and you decided to get married? Would that have some type of impact or change on perhaps what you're currently doing? Fact or fiction, criminals are impulsive risk takers. Could that be a sign of someone, if you're impulsive and you like to take risks, does that increase your opportunity to be involved in different types of crime? Well, we hope to answer some of these as we go through. If we don't, at least it'll get your brain thinking, and if we do, then you'll have the answer anyway. So a quick case study on the Pettit murders. I've got a link there below the photo that you can go to if you want to. Again, you don't have to, but we're going to talk a little bit about this case. So, fewer crimes are as horrific as the murder of Jennifer, Michaela, and Haley Pettit during a home invasion in the suburb of Cheshire, Connecticut. Now, the crime began on July 23, 2007, when career criminals Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komazarjevsky, that's a mouthful, spotted the Pettits at a grocery store and followed them home. Now, at first, Hayes and Komazarjevsky planned to rob the Pettit house and leave the family unharmed, but when they were there, things went wrong, so things changed. They entered the home. They found Mr. Pettit sleeping on the couch, so they hit him with a baseball bat and they tied him up, and then they also tied up or subdued both Mrs. Pettit and the two children. When they searched the house and didn't find the cash that they wanted, Hayes then left and filled 2 gas cans with gasoline and then forced Jennifer Pettit to go to her bank and take out some money. Now, while she was at the bank, she was able to pass a note to the teller, who alerted the bank manager, who subsequently called the police. Now, rather than storming the house or letting the 2 suspects know that they were surrounded, the police spent some time assessing the situation, trying to figure out what they were going to do while they set up a perimeter. That's where they kind of surround the house. Now, while this was happening, Komazarjevsky raped the 11-year-old Michaela, while Hayes raped and strangled Jennifer Pettit. And when the pair realized that William Pettit had escaped, because during this, when they were committing these other crimes, he was able to get out, they doused the house with gasoline, including the bedrooms where the girls were tied up. And then Hayes and Komazarjevsky then started a fire and they fled, but they were apprehended by police. But not before Haley and Michaela had both died of smoke inhalation. And remember, the wife, Jennifer, was strangled and killed. So you can see some of the pictures there of the crime scene. And the crime scene really was so gruesome that some of the jurors had to be treated later on after the trial for PTSD. And something kind of interesting, and you'll see this in a lot of different cases during the trial, the defense lawyers presented evidence in an effort to spare Hayes and Komazarjevsky from the death penalty. So Komazarjevsky was portrayed as a damaged person who was sexually abused as a child, and he suffered from mood disorders and head injuries and abused drugs and cut himself with knives and razors. And even his evangelical Christian adoptive parents denied him proper care, relying instead on religion. Now remember, this is what the defense attorney was saying. And a psychiatrist by the name of Eric Goldsmith, who interviewed Hayes for about 37 hours over 8 different sessions, noted that Hayes had a very troubled and abusive upbringing, was molested by a teenage babysitter when he was about 10 or 11, and had developed a sexual fetish that caused him to associate an object, a woman's old sneaker, with sexual arousal. So he had issues. Now, at the end of the day, despite defense efforts, both Hayes and Komazarjevsky were found guilty and sentenced to death. But again, both suspects told their story of abuse or what have you. But after the trial and while they were in prison, in 2012, Connecticut abolished the death penalty for future crimes, and 11 men that remained on death row until 2015, when the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled by a vote of 4-3 that the death penalty violated the state's constitution. So basically what I'm telling you here is that because of that change, both of the suspects in this case did not receive the death penalty, but instead they were given life in prison. So why do I tell you this? Well, I tell you this because developmental criminologists, which is what we're talking about, try to understand why some people like Stephen Hayes and Joshua Komazarjevsky begin their criminal involvement in illegal activity as children, while others are late starters. So why do people start, and how does it keep going? And efforts to understand the onset, the continuity, how does it continue on, and termination of crime and criminality have resulted in a variety of developmental theories, those things we're going to talk about today, that focus not so much on the single individual criminal, but on the creation, meaning how does it start, and persistence, how does it keep going, of a criminal career. How does that happen? And criminal career, by definition, is engaging in antisocial acts early in adolescence and continuing those illegal behaviors into adulthood, a pattern of persistent offending across your life course. So again, kind of an interesting thing, and we're going to look at some research by a couple of different individuals. We'll talk very briefly about Sheldon and Eleanor Gluck. We'll look at some stuff by Sampson and Laub, by Marvin Wolfgang, and finally by Lober and LeBlanc. So, as you may recall back in chapter 1, the research efforts by Sheldon and Eleanor Gluck formed the basis of today's developmental approach. Now, soon after the publication of some of their work, their methodology, and their integration of biological, psychological, and social factors were kind of criticized. And for many years, their work was sort of ignored a little bit. Well, during the 90s, the legacy was rediscovered. So the Gluck's legacy, meaning what they were talking about before, some of their research, was rediscovered by criminologists Robert Sampson and John Laub, who used modern statistical techniques to reanalyze some of the Gluck's carefully drawn empirical measurements. And Laub and Sampson's findings, published in a series of books and articles, fueled the popularity again of the developmental approach. Now, the Philadelphia cohort research by Marvin Wolfgang and some of his associates sparked interest in explaining criminal career development. And Wolfgang's research focused attention on criminal careers. Again, kind of interesting. And his work prompted criminologists to ask the fundamental question: what prompts one person to engage in persistent, meaning like ongoing, criminal activity, while another, who on the surface has the same set of life circumstances, finds a way to stay out of that crime endeavor, if you will, and travel a more conventional path? So, kind of interesting when you look at it. Now, even more research in 1990, a paper by Loeber and LeBlanc was another important contribution that spurred interest in this developmental criminology. And in this work, Loeber and LeBlanc proposed that criminologists should devote more time and effort to understand basic questions about the evolution of criminal careers, rather than viewing criminality as a static and constant. A person simply is either a criminal or non-criminal. They viewed criminality as a dynamic process with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And guess what? It changes along the way. So kind of an interesting theory. So from these and some similar efforts, a view of crime has emerged that incorporates change and growth. And that people may show a propensity to offend early in their lives, but the nature and frequency of their activities are often impacted or affected by forces beyond their control, which elevate and sustain their criminal activity. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple of different theories. We're going to look at 3 views of criminal career development. And again, here's the information. There's the book cover when it comes to Sampson and Laub's information about the evolution of career criminals. So we're going to touch on these, kind of summarize them a little bit, and then we will get into each one of these areas deeper. So as criminologists began to explore this concept of criminal careerism, 3 interdependent yet interrelated developmental theories or views appeared. The first, referred to as life course theory, suggests that criminal behavior is a dynamic process influenced by characteristics as well as social experiences, and that the factors that cause antisocial behaviors change over a person's life. The next view, referred to as propensity theory, suggests that human development is controlled by a master latent trait. Now, propensity theory is also referred to sometimes as latent trait theory. And this theory, or this trait, remains stable and unchanging throughout a person's lifetime. And as people travel through their life course, this propensity is always present, directing their behavior. Because this hidden trait is enduring, the ebb and flow of criminal behavior are shaped less by personal change and more by the impact of external forces such as environment and opportunity. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. And then the third view, trajectory theory, suggests that there are multiple pathways or trajectories into a criminal career. And according to this approach, there are subgroups within a population that follow distinctively different developmental routes toward and even away from a criminal career. So again, those are kind of summarizing them up just very quickly. Now, just giving you a definition, because we talked about, career criminal, what is it? Well, a career criminal or a habitual offender is any person who has been convicted of multiple crimes. Crimes committed may be a repeat of the same crime again and again, or even different types. And there are criminal statutes that have been instituted which require those designated as habitual offenders to receive harsher penalties or enhancements, if you will, for subsequent criminal convictions. So now again, we're going to kind of summarize a little bit here, and then we're going to jump into things a little bit deeper. So life course theory again suggests that criminal behavior is a dynamic process influenced by individual characteristics as well as social experiences, that the factors cause antisocial behavior to change dramatically over a person's lifespan. And propensity theory again suggests that human development is controlled by this master latent trait. Remember, that remains stable and unchanging. And as you travel through your life course, while this propensity is always there, it helps direct our behavior. And one of the examples is it can result in increased propensity to commit crime. So like if you join a gang, that particular track, if you will, that status provides more opportunities to engage in crime, like shooting or drug sales or what have you. And then that third one, again, in summary, suggests that there are multiple trajectories or paths to criminal careers, and this is the trajectory theory. And according to this approach, there are different subgroups within that population that follow different pathways, both toward and away from crime. And what I put in here for you to look at too, if you want to take the time, is an interesting pathway of Mr. Kenneth Young. It's an individual that was arrested for his part in a couple of armed robberies. He was a juvenile at the time. I'm not going to give up the whole story, but if you watch it, I think you will find it interesting to see how his pathway began and where he is currently at today. As always, I throw these charts in here for you because as we talk a lot about these theories, sometimes it's hard to look at some of the similarities or the differences between the three. So here I have the definition of each one along with similarities and differences. All right, so are people really different? Or are we more or less the same but shaped by our different experiences? And I have here a couple of sets of twins, and we ask the question, are they the same? Are they different? Or why do sometimes one twin is this way and one twin is that way? Or why aren't they all the same? Or is it our social experiences or our environmental experiences or what? The question is kind of one of the core issues separating some of those different branches of developmental theory. Now, with that, there's a couple of terms that we need to know. And again, we're still in the foundations of this developmental theory. And this is the population heterogeneity versus state dependence. So the concept of population heterogeneity assumes that the propensity of an individual to participate in antisocial or criminal behavior is a relatively stable trait, unchanging over their life course. Within a given population, people differ in their behavior choices. Some are hot-headed and some are violent and inclined to commit crime, while others remain reasonable and presumably law-abiding. And according to this view, individual differences, again, remain stable and are not affected by the consequences or participation in crime or any other changing circumstances. So under this population heterogeneity, the propensity to commit crime is stable over the life course, and those who have it continue to commit crime. Now, in contrast, the concept of what we call, again, it's another definition, state dependence, suggests that people change and develop as they mature, and that life events have a significant influence on future behavior. And life course theorists embrace this concept because it can explain continuity and desistance from crime, meaning how people continue or how they stop. While positive experiences can help the troubled person adjust and conform, damaging encounters and events have the potential to increase future criminal involvement. And hopefully those two definitions kind of make sense for you. And to show you that we can change a little bit, in 1980, at the age of 14, T.J. Leiden became a neo-Nazi skinhead, soon rising through the ranks of the Hammerskin Nation, one of the largest white supremacist transnational organizations in America. And after 15 years of spreading hate, bigotry, and racism, TJ turned his back on this particular movement. And I have a link to a video, and you can watch it if you want. And actually, I'll have the link in Canvas, and you can watch it there as well. But the reason that I'm talking about this, because we're talking about life course theory, or we're going to jump into it again here, or developmental theory, something happened in his life that was one of those major things that changed him from this white supremacist to someone who was not. So I'm not going to give it away, but I want you to, if you have the time, watch it, okay? So now let's jump into each one of these three areas a little bit deeper because it really merits our attention here. So life course theory. According to the life course view, even as toddlers, people begin relationships and behaviors that will determine their entire life course. And as children, they must learn to conform to social rules and function effectively in society. And then later as teens, they are expected to begin thinking about careers, complete their schooling, leave their parents' home, enter the workforce. In young adulthood, people find permanent relationships, eventually marry, and begin their own families. These transformations are expected to take place in an orderly fashion. Now, disruptions in life's major transitions may be destructive and ultimately promote criminality, and those who are already at risk because of socioeconomic problems or family dysfunction tend to be the most susceptible during these awkward transitions, if you will. So we know that this, in life course theory, that criminality is kind of a dynamic process. And people who sometimes get in trouble early in life, especially those who are arrested and given an official criminal label, may find it difficult to shake the criminal way of life as they mature. And we also know that sometimes racial disparity in the criminal justice system helps put minority group members at a disadvantage, increasing the likelihood that they will become embedded in criminal careers. But while most kids age out of crime, the ability to change with age as people become embedded in a criminal lifestyle starts to come about. So what may help a person resist a life of crime while they're still in their teens, for example, might be school achievement or something like that. But we know again that most young criminals desist and do not become adult offenders, but some do go on to have a long career as a chronic offender. The seeds of a criminal career are planted early in life, and this is called early onset. And early onset of deviance strongly predicts more frequent, varied, and sustained criminality later on in life. And what causes some kids to begin offending at an early age? Among these suspected root causes would be things like inadequate emotional support, or distant peer relationships, or psychological issues, or psychological problems. And even among the psychological conditions, things like hyperactivity, ADHD, or even CD or conduct disorder. All of these can actually come about. I threw in kind of an interesting case study if you want to look at it when we talk about criminality and youngsters, looking at the Jordan Brown case. And again, I'm not going to give these away. I'll also post it in Canvas, so you don't have to get it from the lecture, but you can also take a look at it there. And it's kind of an interesting case in itself. So that leads us into some other sub areas that fall under this life course theory. And one of them would be what we call problem behavior syndrome. One life course view is that criminality is but one of many social and personal problems faced by people who have a risky lifestyle. Referred to collectively as problem behavior syndrome, these behaviors include social, personal, environmental dysfunction, ranging from poor health to things like unemployment. So those who exhibit PBS are prone to more difficulties than the general population, and they find themselves experiencing personal dilemmas ranging from drug abuse to being accident prone, requiring more health care and hospitalization, becoming teenage parents, or even having mental health problems. And PBS has been linked to individual level personality problems such as impulsiveness or rebelliousness, and even low ego, family problems, and substance abuse, again, and poor health and educational failure. So in some, problem behavior syndrome portrays crime as a type of a social problem rather than the product of other social problems. People involved in crime may fall prey to other social problems, again, ranging from poverty to premature death. So still, again, another sub area, and we're going to hit like 4 or 5 of these, called continuity of crime. Another aspect of life course theory is what we call the continuity of crime. The best predictor of future criminality would be past criminality, and children who are repeatedly in trouble during early adolescence will generally still be antisocial in their middle teens. People who display conduct problems in youth are the ones most likely to commit crimes as adults. As adults, people involved in the most serious crimes continue to misbehave even when they are behind bars. So life course theorists believe that the continuity of crime is state dependent. Criminal activity is sustained because law violators and rule breakers seem to lack the social survival skills necessary to find work or to develop the interpersonal relationships they need to allow them to stop. And as a result, antisocial behavior may be contagious. People at risk for criminality may infect those around them, thereby creating an ever-widening circle of peers and acquaintances who support that particular type of criminality or deviant behavior. And a number of systematic life course theories have been formulated that account for such factors as, again, early onset, the clustering of behavior problems, and the continuance of a criminal career. So again, this continuity of crime thing kind of creeps up, and you can maybe look at the Columbine shooting and the individuals involved in that, and take a look at their history on some of the things that they had going on in their lives that may have made them do what they actually did. So part of this continuity of crime, again, is that antisocial behavior may be contagious, and that there's a systematic life course theories. These different factors kind of integrate in there or have an impact. So personal factors, or social factors, or socialization factors, or cognitive factors, or situational factors. All of these play into the continuity of crime. So now we're going to take a look at some turning points. More specifically, we're going to look at something called age-graded theory. An important work in 1993 called Crime in the Making, Sampson and Laub find that the course of a criminal career can be affected by events that occur later on in life, even after a chronic criminal career has been undertaken. Now, while in some cases a career in crime begins early in life and continues over the life course, it is wrong to believe that once this course is set, that nothing can impede its progress. And what they're saying here is that there are turning points in a criminal career that can alter its course and direction, changing a lifetime of criminality, if you will, into a more productive type situation. And if you go back to TJ Lydon and you had an opportunity to watch that video, you will truly understand and appreciate this particular theory probably more than any of them. So summarizing, there are turning points in a criminal career that can alter the course and direction, that change somebody from what they were. And it could be love, marriage, and criminality. So, there could be some stability brought on by the relationship. On the other hand, breaking up could be a precursor to criminal activity. Marital success could cause you to kind of reassess what you're doing, look at some personal reassessment. So these turning points can make you change. And in your textbook on page 294, there's this chart that goes over age-graded theory and also talks about some of those turning points, if you will. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on the chart, but I just wanted you to know that it was there. Now, the last part or theory that we're going to talk about here is the latent trait or propensity theory. And in a popular 1985 book titled Crime and Human Nature, two prominent social scientists, James Q. Wilson and Richard Herrnstein, argued that personal traits such as genetic makeup, intelligence, and body build operate in tandem with social variables that include poverty and family function. Now, together, these factors influence people to, quote, choose criminality, end quote, over non-criminal behavioral alternatives. So again, kind of a interesting thing. And following their lead, and we're going to get more into it in a minute, David Rowe and Wayne Osgood and Alan Niswander proposed the concept of latent traits, the idea that a number of people in the population have a personal attribute or propensity that controls their inclination to commit criminal acts. This disposition, or again, latent trait, remember it's kind of hidden, is either present at birth or established early in life, and it remains stable over time. Now, suspected latent traits include defective intelligence, impulsive personality, genetic abnormalities, the physical chemical functioning of the brain, and environmental influences on the brain, such as drugs, chemicals, and even injuries. And those who carry one of these latent traits are in danger of becoming career criminals, and those who lack the propensity to commit crime have a much lower risk. So again, these latent traits are formed at birth, if you will. And it talks about the propensity to commit crime is stable. It talks about the opportunity to commit crime fluctuates over time, and that people age out of crime because they mature, and there's simply fewer opportunities to commit crimes such as or such acts greater than, or these big crimes other than remaining straight, because that's just kind of like crime in human nature. So again, the latent trait propensity theory is kind of an interesting concept as well. So now we're going to jump into what they call the general theory of crime. Now, in their general theory of crime, or if you want to use the initials GTC, Michael Gottfredson and Travis Hershey attribute their tendency to commit crime to a single and powerful latent trait, and that is a person's level of self-control. And they go on to say that people with limited self-control tend to be impulsive. Remember our fact or fiction. So people with limited self-control tend to be impulsive. They are insensitive to other people's feelings, physical, risk takers, short-sighted, and nonverbal. They have a here and now orientation and refuse to work for distant goals. They lack diligence, tenacity, and persistence. And people lacking self-control tend to be adventuresome, active, and self-centered. And criminality is only one aspect of their problems. As they mature, they often have unstable marriages, jobs, and even friendships. So people with this limited self-control tend to be a little bit more impulsive, short-sighted, and you can see some of the things that kind of goes along with that. So what causes some of this impulsivity or low self-control to come about? Well, let's keep going, and we're going to get to that. So these individuals, again, they are less likely to feel shame if they engage in deviant acts, and they are more likely to find themselves or find them pleasurable, the deviant acts. And they are also more likely to engage in dangerous behaviors like drinking. Now, because those with low self-control enjoy risky, exciting, or thrilling behaviors with immediate gratification, they are more likely to enjoy criminal acts which require stealth and agility and speed and power than, let's say, conventional acts which demand long-term study and cognitive and verbal skills. And as Gottfredson and Hershey put it, they derive satisfaction from money without work, sex without courtship, revenge without court delays. So again, many of these individuals who have a propensity for committing crime also engage in other risky, or impulsive behaviors. So now what causes that? What causes impulsivity or low self-control to develop? Well, Gottfredson and Hershey traced the root cause of poor self-control to inadequate child rearing practices. And parents who refuse or are unable to monitor a child's behavior, to recognize deviant behavior when it occurs, and to punish that behavior, will in fact produce children who lack that self-control. So now if we go back to our fact or fiction, the question was, criminals are impulsive risk takers. Well, the answer is, according to the general theory of crime, criminals are impulsive people who do sometimes, or for the most part, lack the self-control to curb their criminal activities. Now, what about the learning or biology part? So again, we're talking about this propensity theory, and we're under this general theory of crime. But is it learning or is it biology? There may also be a genetic biosocial component to the development of impulsivity. So we have to kind of think about that. Children of impulsive parents are the ones most likely to exhibit a lack of self-control. And some research done by David Farrington and his colleagues shows that antisocial behavior runs in families, and that having criminal relatives is a significant predictor of future misbehaviors. Now, while these studies are not definitive, and keep that in mind, they do raise the possibility that the intergenerational transfer of impulsivity might have a biological basis. But at the end of the day, remember, okay, not all impulsive people become criminals. So we're going to talk for a second about the act and the offender. So not all impulsive people become criminals, nor does impulsivity mean that someone is consistently antisocial. Now, in their general theory of crime, we just read it, Gottfredson and Hershey consider the criminal offender and the criminal act as separate concepts. On the one hand, criminal acts like robberies or burglaries are illegal events that offenders engage in when they perceive them to be advantageous. Burglaries are typically committed by young males looking for cash, liquor, entertainment. The crime provides an easy short-term gratification. And on the other hand, criminal offenders are people predisposed to commit crimes. They are not, however, robots who commit crimes or crime without restraint. Their days are also filled with conventional behaviors like going to school or parties or concerts or even church. So again, it's important that we know that, not all impulsive people become offenders, if you will. So with that being said, how do we test it? We've talked a lot about the general theory of crime, so how do we actually test it for a moment? Well, following the publication of a general theory of crime, dozens of research efforts tested the validity, both directly and indirectly, of Gottfredson and Hershey's theoretical views. And a meta-analysis, or closer, smaller, a bunch of smaller ones, analysis of these studies indicated that GTC is a valid theory of the onset of deviant behavior, and the patterns of antisocial behavior predicted by Gottfredson and Hershey seem to be valid. So again, kind of some interesting thing. Now, one of the criticisms of the general theory of crime is that people do actually change over their lifetime. And you can even look at the case of Stanley Tookie Williams, the co-founder of the Crips gang, in prison for the murder of 4 people in 1979. In 1993, he became an anti-gang advocate in prison. Now, he was executed in 2005, but he truly did change his life, and I have some information there if you would like to go to that and look at it. So, again, understand that although this GTC seems persuasive, several questions and criticisms have remained and still need to be answered. And a couple of those would be impulsivity is only one of many personal traits that are correlated with crime. Another would be that the GTC does not explain racial or gender differences. And then again, another one would be people change, and so does their level of self-control. And then finally, the last one, environmental patterns are not adequately explained. So that's the more technical side of that, but I think you all get the picture. Okay, so now we're coming up to the end where we're going to look at the last piece, and we're going to talk about trajectory theory. So trajectory theory is the third developmental approach that combines elements of propensity and life course theories. The basic premise is that there is more than one path to crime and more than one class of offender. There are different trajectories in a criminal career. So because people are different, no single model of criminality can hope to describe every person's journey through life. People offend at a different pace, commit different kinds of crimes, and are influenced by different external factors. As external influences, both individual and social shift, or both individual and social, shift and change, so to do offending trajectories. So things change, and somebody's life course path will change. So again, because people are different, no single model really describes everybody's journey. And because there's little question that there is more than a single route to a criminal career, and criminal careerists travel down a bunch of different paths, criminologists have sought to identify those trajectories, those different ways for the onset, the continuity, and the completion, if you will, of criminality. So let's look at some of those factors that play into what we're talking about. The first would be age and offending. So some people begin at an early age and later become adult offenders, while others begin their violent careers in adulthood, having escaped and avoided crime as juveniles. And as they mature, people who begin offending at an early age may later segue into a more age-appropriate crimes. The violent adolescent schoolyard bully matures into the abusive husband in adulthood, but they remain violent over the life course. So again, we do have some different things we have to kind of consider here. So personality and offending trajectories, the reasons why some offenders start early, others late, and some not at all, may be linked to some other problems like psychological problems or mental disease or personality disorder. And chronic offenders and non-offenders, the spectrum offending frequency from chronic to no crime at all. So what are some of these different personality things that we're going to talk about? So again, the reason why some offenders start early, others late, and some not at all may be linked to some of these factors that we just went over. But what about the chronic offenders? There is also a spectrum of offending frequency, ranging from people who have never committed a crime to those who repeatedly commit crimes and offenses. So there was some research done by Alex Picaro and Associates that shows that even chronic offenders can be divided up into groups. So as you may recall, going back a little bit to chapter 2, Marvin Wolfgang first identified the concept of chronic offending when he analyzed data from the Philadelphia cohort study. Now some research shows that even chronic offenders can be divided into subgroupings. And as I said a minute ago, Alex Piquero and his associates found 5 classes, subgroups, based on their offending histories. And we have the non-offender, the low-rate adolescent peak offenders, the very low-rate chronic offenders, the high-rate adolescent peak offenders, and the high-risk chronic offenders. Now, following them over time until they reached their 40s, Piquero found that boys in each of these offending trajectories faced a different degree of social and personal problems, such as poor housing, a troubled romantic life, mental illness, and drug involvement. Not surprisingly, those youth classified as high chronic offenders were the ones most likely to experience life failure. So again, we have some subclasses. So there is a group of non-offenders or abstainers, despite the fact that most of their peers engage in a wide variety of antisocial activities. These people never break the law. Who are those folks who never shoplifted or smoked or got drunk or had a fight? So there are some abstainers and what we call late bloomers, if you will. So you have to kind of ask yourself this question: how do these people kind of fit into the thing? Well, their unpopularity possibly shielded them from pressure to commit acts. So maybe they really weren't that popular, which kind of helped them stay out of or hanging around those people that were involved in it. And there's also genetic code that insulates them from criminality producing factors in the environment. So sometimes genetics can actually play a role in this as well. So now let's really talk about this trajectory theory and the pathways to crime. So trajectory theory recognizes that criminals may travel more than a single road. Some may specialize in violence and extortion, some may be involved in theft and fraud, and others may engage in a variety of different criminal acts. And each type of specialist may be unique. People who commit violent crimes may be different from nonviolent property and drug offenders. So we have these different pathways. And we're going to look at a couple of important definitions. Some of the most important research on delinquent pathways or trajectories has been conducted by Rolf Loeber and his associates. Now, using data from a longitudinal study of Pittsburgh youth, Loeber identified 3 distinct paths to criminal careers, and we'll just briefly touch on them. The authority conflict pathway, and this begins at an early age with stubborn behavior, and this leads later to deviance and then to authority avoidance. And then there's the covert pathway, begins with minor underhanded behavior and progresses to things like fire starting and theft. And then there's the overt pathway, begins with minor aggression, leads to physical fighting, and eventually escalates into crime. And the Loeber research indicates that each of these paths may lead to a sustained deviant career. Some people enter 2 and even 3 paths simultaneously. They are stubborn, they lie to teachers and parents, are bullies, and commit petty thefts. And those taking more than one path, of course, are more likely to become persistent offenders as they tend to mature. And in your textbook on page 307, you can see the trajectory theory pathway. So again, we kind of just covered this. I'm not going to go over it that much. I just want to let you know that the actual diagram was there. So what about sticking with trajectory theory, the adolescent limited and life course persistence offenders, a little bit more on this. According to psychologist Terry Moffat, most young offenders follow 1 or 2 of these paths. Adolescent limited offenders may be considered typical teenagers who get into trouble or get into minor scrapes and engage in what might be considered rebellious teenage behavior with their friends. As they reach their mid-teens, adolescent limited delinquents begin to mimic the antisocial behavior of more troubled teens, only to reduce the frequency of their offending as they mature to around 18. Now, the second path is one taken by a small group of what we call life course persisters, who begin their offending career at a very early age and continue to offend well into adulthood. So this is where delinquents who, again, begin their offending career early and continue to offend as they tend to get a little bit older. So what about, and again, we're just about ready to finish up here. We talk about public policy implications of developmental theory. So policies based on the premise of developmental theory have inspired a number of initiatives. And since the aim is to set people on the right developmental track, these efforts typically feature multi-systemic treatment efforts designed to provide at-youth risks with personal, social, educational, and family services. And interventions are aimed at promoting things like academic success and social competence and educational enhancement during the elementary grades. And many of the most successful programs are aimed at strengthening children's social emotional competence and positive coping skills, and suppressing the development of things like antisocial aggressive behavior. The most promising multi-component prevention programs are designed to improve developmental skills. They may include a school component, an after-school component, and a parent involvement component. And all of these components share the goal of increasing protective factors and decreasing risk factors in the areas of the family, the community, the school, and the individual. So that was a lot of information. We made it underneath our 60-minute time period. So thanks for listening this evening. Do look at the key terms that are located not just in Canvas, but also at the end of the chapter. And also take a look at the critical thinking questions just to get your mind kind of thinking about some of the context of the chapter material that we covered. And with that being said, that will conclude our lecture on Chapter 9. And until next time.